Ever since Duskbloods was announced on Nintendo Direct in April 2025, there has been so much hype and speculation around FromSoft's next big game. But what came after very quickly was the fans realizing that the game was going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. From there, the controversy exploded. In the midst of Night Rain's life cycle, there was always a background noise of people speculating about Duskbloods. People argue whether or not FromSoft is trying to quickly get the bag by working with Nintendo, how it is unfair to ask players to buy a Switch 2 just to play the game. There were more and more speculations added on top once people started to make associations of Night Rain and Duskbloods. Why did the devs abandon Night Rain after releasing just one DLC when the fans loved the game so much many wanted it to be a live service game? Amidst all the online discourse, it became increasingly difficult to discern the truth from misinformation. And as time went on, questions about Duskbloods piled on, but FromSoft never really gave us any details about the Duskbloods other than a few minutes of trailer and a few speech here and there. We didn't know anything definitively until now. IGN recently released a monumental article on Duskbloods, and in this article, an interview with Miyazaki directly addresses many questions players argue over. Now, I'm not going to read out the entire article, but I will link it in the description box. I highly encourage you all to read it through. Today, I want to focus on discussing aspects of the article that will address the following questions. 1. Why is the Duskbloods on Nintendo Switch 2? 2. Did FromSoft abandon Night Rain for Duskbloods? 3. Why did FromSoft decide to develop online multiplayer genre games when historically they had never done so? And 4. Is FromSoft changing their direction into online multiplayer games? I'm really hoping this video will find the right audience because I really want to put to rest a lot of negative sentiment that is based on misinformation. Instead of further speculating on some of these topics, let's see what we actually know, coming straight from Miyazaki. Now let's start with the first and the most hotly debated question. Why is the Duskbloods on Nintendo Switch 2? I don't think the start of the controversy around Duskbloods was ever really about the game itself, but rather FromSoft's decision to make it a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. The primary contention is the price tag of the Nintendo Switch 2. Sitting at $450 US, the Nintendo Switch 2 definitely comes at a big cost. Some people believe that FromSoft is only doing this because Nintendo is offering a strong financial incentive, while others think that FromSoft made a bad decision because most of FromSoft's base doesn't own a Switch and would not shell out so much money just to play this game. Miyazaki actually gave a very direct answer here. He says, and I quote, "In terms of the reason that we initially decided to go with Nintendo, we had had an opportunity to discuss the idea for the game with them, and I think they seemed very excited and very receptive to the idea. They seemed very forward-thinking in terms of how to do it. Before considering the business aspect of it, that alone was something that I found very appealing and gave me a lot more reassurance for moving forward with this. Of course, the game isn't out yet, so there are more things to consider, but in terms of the relationship currently and how we think it's going, up until this point, the systems and the overall rule set of the game are very unique, and I think having someone who can constantly give us feedback, support, additional ideas, and the balancing first of all, because these features are quite complex and difficult. Having this relationship is definitely key to that. Also, with the complexity of the systems, the onboarding tutorials and making sure players understand how the game works and how to succeed in the game is something we've historically not been super great at conveying instantly. We've definitely just dropped players in and hoped that they would figure it out. In this case, Nintendo is definitely the right partner for better conveying that information in a way that is understandable to the player, and it definitely suits their strengths. So what is Miyazaki saying? My extremely short and simple summary is that his reasons are: 1. Nintendo was receptive to Duskbloods and had an idea on how to execute. 2. Duskbloods systems are complex and difficult to develop. Nintendo is a great team player in that aspect. And 3. FromSoft tutorials are non-existent and Nintendo can help players onboard Duskbloods. Now, my interpretation of this whole spiel is pretty much, I want to make a cool thing that is complex and I need a good partner to help me make that. And Nintendo is that great partner. When I read this interview, I was definitely surprised by the mention of Nintendo's tutorials, but it makes sense. Super Mario Bros. Is widely known to have the most perfect tutorial level there, where it gives you all the tools you would need in the game. FromSoft is the complete opposite. Historically, I've always been fine with FromSoft's lack of extensive tutorial despite a challenging game franchise. But when it comes down to Duskbloods, a complex online PvPvE game, giving players a solid base of understanding of the game mechanics is paramount to the game's success. So yeah, FromSoft needs help, and Nintendo can give that help. It makes sense. So the next question is, did FromSoft abandon Night Rain for Duskbloods? This is kind of a funny question if you ask me, because it implies that Night Rain came out, then FromSoft look at Night Rain and decide to stop working on it, then turn their attention back to work on Duskbloods. Recently, under almost every Night Rain video, there are a portion of the comment section filled with people saying that FromSoft abandoned Night Rain for Duskbloods. Now, as a Night Rain fan, I would also like more content, another DLC perhaps, but my desire for more Night Rain has nothing to do with Duskbloods. And it turns out Miyazaki confirmed this himself. He said, and I quote, "On the topic of Night Rain, it's funny because there was never really any big plan that these two games, Night Rain and Duskbloods, would both release next to each other. I mean, that's a different director, but both of these ideas just coincided with being multiplayer games. It's not necessarily some big reveal saying that this is the direction we plan to go moving forward. We still have a heavy focus on single player content as well. This is just something that happened to work out the way it did." Well, there you have it. The fact that Night Rain and Duskbloods released back to back is a pure coincidence. I suppose it's not entirely unfathomable. From a developed timeline perspective, Duskbloods has been in development since 2021, which preceded even Elden Ring. Now, there are no confirmed dates on exactly when Night Rain went into development, but very likely after Elden Ring was released. So then, as it stands, both games overlapped in certain periods of development. And the rest of it was just like Miyazaki said, they were led by different directors, and this was all a coincidence. Now, along the same vein comes the next question. Why did FromSoft decide to develop online multiplayer genre games when historically they had never done so? When players realized that Night Rain and Duskbloods are releasing one after the other, there were lots of speculation as to whether or not making online multiplayer games was going to be the future of FromSoft. Night Rain was an asset flip game as an extension of Elden Ring, and I say this in the best way possible, but Duskbloods has its own separate thing. It seemed very funny how FromSoft even arrived at this new genre of games after making so many epic single-player titles. Miyazaki's answer to this is pretty direct and thorough. He says, and I quote, "I think in a lot of previous titles, such as Demon Souls and the Dark Souls series, there were a lot of unique online elements that were implemented. Things like the Covenant systems and invasions, and in addition to that, there were a lot of other things that we wanted to try. Things that seemed like great ideas but didn't really fit in the context of a single-player game, or within the context of those games specifically. Over time, a lot of these ideas piled up, things that you wish you could have done here and there. Having an outlet for them, somewhere we can find a place where they all fit, or can be made to fit specifically in that multiplayer context, is something that was always at the forefront of my mind." To me, what Miyazaki said makes perfect sense. PvP has always felt like an out-of-place element to the Souls' single-player experiences. I still remember farming those goddamn earthly flowers by the 4 belfries to make those furled finger summoning items in Elden Ring, so it's interesting to see that this is an aspect of the games that Miyazaki is actually interested in exploring further. From here, the forward-thinking question is FromSoft changing their direction into making online multiplayer games? In terms of whether or not this multiplayer roguelike genre was going to be FromSoft's new direction, this was Miyazaki's answer. Personally, it's very fun to make a multiplayer game like this. It's not something we've done a lot, and we're looking forward to seeing players' reactions and getting the feedback. But it's like the more you work on something multiplayer for a long time, if anything, it scratches that itch only to want to make something single player again. So there we have it. Multiplayer games was something Miyazaki wanted to explore, but it wasn't going to be a permanent directional change in FromSoft's trajectory. If anything, we're getting a pretty good indicator that we'll probably be receiving some single player games down the line. The rest of the article goes in depth on the specifics of Miyazaki's vision on Duskbloods, its multiplayer's aspects, longevity, and funny enough, he also touches on how to make sure veteran players don't bully beginners in the long run, especially in this PvP aspect of the game. It was very shocking to see that Miyazaki had been so quiet about this Duskbloods project, and all of a sudden, he is now so open about it all. Now that we have the context of the game sourced straight from Miyazaki, I am beginning to realize that so much of the discourse I had heard about up to this point has been based on premises that are just misinformation. Some say FromSoft abandoned Night Rain for Duskbloods, when in reality they are developed by two different teams on two separate timelines. In fact, Duskbloods has been in development since 2021, when Elden Ring wasn't even released until the following year. Another prevalent rhetoric I've heard frequently is that FromSoft's decision to release Duskbloods as a Switch 2 exclusive was a decision born straight from financial motives. Now, I didn't think it was solely financial, but I did think it was born from FromSoft's intention to develop a long-term relationship with a huge leading game studio. When in reality, Miyazaki was the one shopping around to see who the best partner was in helping him make his vision come true. He wanted to make the game he saw in his mind, and Nintendo believed in that vision and wanted to help him. Are there financial motives? I mean, they are a business at the end of the day, and this collaboration is a business decision. So yeah, financial motives are a part of it. But Miyazaki as a game director also has a vision, and I'd like to think of him as an artist, an artisan, and he has a creative vision that requires an operations team and a publisher to make it come true. So, see, while I had a different assumption than the rhetoric I had heard, it was still based on a premise that was just a teeny tiny portion of reality, if that. As players, when we see a game studio we love make a new decision that is different from recent years, because this is not unprecedented, look at Bloodborne. But when we see that decision made, it's so natural to have curiosity about the intention behind the decision. Miyazaki, and more broadly, FromSoft, hasn't made a lot of definitive statements historically, so we as players fill in the blanks with our own guesses. And that's fine. But if we're not careful about hedging our bets and make that super clear when we throw our guesses around, this is how misinformation can spread like wildfire. One person poses a question, another responds with their guesses, then the third person extrapolates that conversation and make their own assumptions on top. Now, by the time this game of telephone reaches the 10th, the 20th person, the first person's question had already become the definitive premise, and the amalgamation of the loudest voice becomes a fact. You see, nobody at FromSoft actually said anything, but it seems like everyone conjectured their way into disappointment. It just doesn't need to be like this. People hold different expectations for what they think they would like to see from FromSoft, and my perspective is that's totally fine. Not every single FromSoft game is targeted at the same player, and I'd wager to say that FromSoft isn't really targeting an audience, so to speak. Miyazaki reads like an artisan, and he says so as much. He wants to make the game that he wants to see exist. We as players just happen to love his vision, not the other way around. Sure, ask questions when there is curiosity, but in the face of an absence of information, let's not fill in the gaps with our own theories and state them as facts. It's okay to just say we don't know, because at the end of the day, we don't have to know. Alright, that's a wrap for now, and until next time, bye.